They say Pine Hollow used to burn bright with torches, men in white hoods riding through the night, proud of their fear. But one night, fear changed sides. His name was Caleb Turner, a black Union soldier who came home to bury his past, not to fight again. But when the Klan lynched his preacher and came for his sister, something broke in him, and something ancient woke up. One by one, the riders vanished. Horses returned without masters. Hoods floated down river like ghosts stripped bare. Folks whispered that Caleb had become the very thing they feared in the dark. He didn't just fight them, he erased them. Every name, every oath, every grave. And when it was over, the Klan never rode through Pine Hollow again. Because some towns ain't haunted by ghosts, they're guarded by them. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The night air hung thick with humidity in Pine Hollow, Alabama. Summer, 1871. Sweat beaded on Caleb Turner's forehead as he stood in the shadows of tall pines. The smell of tar, smoke, and pine needles mixed into a suffocating cloud. His calloused fingers tightened around the wooden cross hanging from his neck, the last gift his wife had made before fever took her 2 winters ago. Torches appeared first, bobbing like fireflies in the distance. Then came the sound of hooves striking packed dirt. Caleb's jaw tightened. The horses emerged into view, 20 white-hooded figures atop them, their sheets billowing in the night breeze like ghosts. At their front rode Captain Silas McCready, his hood pulled back to reveal his face. The former Confederate officer now served as mayor, though everyone knew his real power came from these midnight rides. The small wooden church stood vulnerable in the clearing. For 3 years, Reverend Jonah Fields had turned it into more than a place of worship. It was a schoolhouse for freed children, a meeting place for families learning to live as citizens rather than property. Tonight, young and old had gathered for evening lessons. Caleb took a step forward, but froze when the first torch sailed through a window. Glass shattered. Flames licked up the dry wood siding. "Stand your ground!" Captain McCready shouted to his men. "Flush them out like rats!" People spilled from the church doors, coughing, stumbling into the dirt yard. Children cried for their mothers. Reverend Jonah emerged last, shepherding the stragglers to safety. His tall frame stood straight, despite his 60 years, dignity evident in every movement. "There he is," McCready pointed. "The one poisoning white minds with his books and northern ideas." 4 riders dismounted, grabbing Reverend Jonah by his arms. The old man didn't struggle. His eyes, calm even now, scanned the crowd until they found Caleb in the shadows. Caleb's hand moved to the knife at his belt. He'd killed men before, white men too, during the war. He stepped toward the clearing, rage building inside his chest. "Don't." Etta's fingers wrapped around his wrist, pulling him back into darkness. His younger sister's eyes shone with tears, but her grip was firm. 20 armed riders, Caleb. They'll kill everyone here if you give them reason." "I can't watch this again," Caleb whispered, voice cracking. "We need you alive," Etta insisted. "Our people need you alive." In the clearing, they tied Reverend Jonah's hands. McCready circled his horse around the gathered families. "This man," he announced, "has violated the natural order, teaching ideas not meant for simple minds, filling children's heads with dreams they can't have." He rode closer to the Reverend. "Did you think we wouldn't notice the books, the writing paper, the maps of places these people will never see?" Reverend Jonah lifted his chin. "The Lord commands us to seek knowledge," he said, voice steady. "These children were born free in America. They have every right." McCready's riding crop struck him across the face. "Rights?" he spat. "The only rights in Pine Hollow are those we allow." They dragged Reverend Jonah to the big oak tree, throwing a rope over a sturdy branch. Caleb trembled with rage As he watched, Etta's grip on his arm the only thing keeping him from charging forward. Some of the congregation turned away. Others stood witnessing, their faces wet with silent tears. "Let this be a lesson," Macready called out as they placed the noose around Reverend Jonah's neck. "There are consequences for those who forget their place." The old man's eyes found the crowd one last time. "Keep learning," he said, voice carrying across the sudden silence. "They fear what we know because—" The horse beneath him was slapped away. The rope snapped taut. Caleb bit down on his fist to keep from crying out. Etta pressed her face against his shoulder, her body shaking with silent sobs. The congregation stood frozen, some praying, some too shocked to move. The clansmen whooped and circled their horses, drunk on power and cruelty. "Let this church burn to ash," Macready ordered, "and nail this to what's left of the door." One of the riders hammered a notice to the church's blackened door frame. The paper fluttered in the heat rising from the flames. "By order of the Knights of Restoration, no more schools, no more gatherings, no more reading." As suddenly as they had appeared, the night riders galloped away, torches blazing against the darkness, leaving behind the burning church, the swinging body, and a community frozen in terror. Hours later, when the last rider had disappeared and the church had collapsed into smoking ruins, Caleb moved from the shadows. With gentle hands, he cut down Reverend Jonah's body. Other men from the settlement helped carry him away from the smoldering church to a small cemetery where generations of their people rested. They dug through the night, taking turns with the shovel, no one speaking. The sky lightened to gray as they finished, dawn creeping over the horizon. Birds began to sing in the trees, oblivious to human suffering below. As they lowered Reverend Jonah's body into the earth, Etta placed wildflowers on his chest. "He loved those children," she whispered. "All he wanted was for them to read, to know there was more to the world than Pine Hollow." The small group stood in a circle, heads bowed. Caleb led them in a quiet prayer, his soldier's voice steady, despite the rage still burning in his chest. When they began covering the grave with soil, Caleb paused. In the distance, torches still flickered at the edge of town, likely celebrating at the tavern. Smoke from the church ruins rose in a thin column against the lightening sky. "If they come again," he murmured to Etta, "I won't hide." She gripped his arm, her eyes red from crying but fierce with determination. "Please, Caleb, stay patient. There are other ways." But Caleb only stared at the rising smoke, the wooden cross tight in his fist, his face set like stone. 2 days after Reverend Jonah's burial, Pine Hollow held its breath. The charred remains of the church stood like a black skeleton against the blue sky, a reminder that no place was safe. People walked quickly, eyes down, voices hushed. Children stayed close to their mothers. Men carried hidden knives in their boots. Caleb sat on the porch of the small cabin he shared with Etta, whittling a piece of pine with his hunting knife. His Union rifle leaned against the wall beside him. He'd spent the morning reinforcing the door hinges, nailing boards across the back windows, and setting up tripwires among the trees surrounding their property. "You're making this place look like a fort," Etta said, stepping onto the porch with a basket of mended clothes. "Better a fort than a grave," Caleb replied, not looking up from his whittling. Etta sighed, watching her brother's hands move with precise, controlled motions. Since coming home from the war, he'd grown quieter, harder. The Caleb who had once told her bedtime stories was buried somewhere beneath scars she couldn't see. "I'm opening the school again today," she said. "Old man Parker said we can use his barn." The knife paused. "After what happened to Jonah?" "Especially after what happened to Jonah." Etta set the basket down and faced her brother. "These children deserve to learn." "That's what he died for?" Caleb looked at his sister's determined face. At 24, Etta had their mother's strength, a quiet dignity that couldn't be broken. She'd been teaching freed children since the war ended, first in secret, then openly once the Union troops arrived. "I can't protect you if they come again," he said. "Then I'll protect myself." She touched the wooden cross hanging around his neck, identical to the one she wore. "Mama didn't raise us to live in fear." Caleb nodded slowly. "I'll walk you there." The old barn sat at the edge of the freedmen's settlement, its weathered boards smelling of hay and thyme. Inside, Etta had arranged crates as seats and hung a slate board on the wall. By noon, 15 children sat before her, ages 5 to 14, their faces solemn but eager. "Today," Etta announced, "we learn about maps." From her bag, she pulled out the very thing that had sealed Reverend Jonah's fate, a rolled parchment showing the United States. The children leaned forward as she pointed to Alabama, then traced her finger north. "This is Pennsylvania, where Mr. Frederick Douglass speaks freely. This is Massachusetts, where books are printed by the thousands. And this," her finger swept west, "is Kansas, where some of our people have started new towns all their own." A small girl raised her hand. "Miss Etta, can we go to those places?" "Yes, child. That's why we learn. So one day, you can go anywhere on this map." Outside the barn, Caleb kept watch, moving between the trees, checking the road for riders. The white folks in town avoided him when he'd gone for supplies that morning. Some crossed the street rather than pass him. Others pretended not to see him at all. Only old Mr. Wilson, the store owner, had met his eyes. "Shame what happened to the Reverend," Wilson had muttered, slipping an extra tin of coffee into Caleb's sack. "Not all of us agree with night riding, you understand." But agreement didn't matter. Caleb knew. What mattered was who had power and who had guns. As twilight fell, Caleb escorted the last children home before returning to the barn where Etta was copying letters for tomorrow's lesson. "Time to go," he said from the doorway. She nodded, gathering her papers. They learned so much today. Little James can already write his whole name. A sound made them both freeze. Horses approaching, not one or two, but many, their hooves drumming against the packed earth. "Get behind me," Caleb ordered, pulling Etta to the back of the barn. The door burst open. 5 riders entered, their white hoods catching the last light of day. 2 carried torches. At their center stood a man Caleb recognized even beneath the hood. Jeb McCready, the sheriff's nephew, the mayor's son, drunk on whiskey and hatred. "Look what we found," Jeb slurred. "Another school for darky children." He spotted the map on the wall and ripped it down, teaching them about places they'll never see. Etta stepped forward. "This is private property. Mr. Parker gave us permission." "Parker's a traitor to his race," one of the hooded men spat. "And you need to learn your lesson better than that old preacher did." Caleb's hand closed around the knife in his pocket. 5 men, all armed. The odds were bad, but they were drunk, clumsy. If he could take one down quickly. Jeb grabbed Etta's arm, yanking her toward him. "Maybe we should teach you proper respect." Something snapped in Caleb. The fear, the rage, the memories of war, all of it channeled into his muscles as he lunged from the shadows. His bayonet, carried through 3 years of fighting, slid between Jeb McCready's ribs with military precision. The young man's eyes widened in shock more than pain. You can't," Jeb gasped, blood bubbling at his lips as Caleb twisted the blade. The other riders stood frozen in disbelief as their leader crumpled to the dirt floor. For a moment, no one moved. Then one screamed, "He killed Jeb! The nigger killed Jeb!" They scrambled backward, fumbling for weapons, but Caleb was already moving, pulling Etta toward the back door. The Klansmen, more interested in retrieving their fallen comrade than giving chase, dragged Jeb's body onto a horse. "We'll hang you for this," one shouted as they rode away. "Every white man in 3 counties will hunt you down." Caleb and Etta ran through the darkness toward their cabin. "Pack only what you need," he ordered. "Food, water, your Bible if you want it. We leave in 10 minutes. "Where will we go?" Etta asked, her voice shaking. "I know places in the swamp, places they won't follow." Dawn broke pale and misty over Pine Hollow. Sheriff Elias Broder led 6 deputies to the Turner cabin, their horses nervous in the morning fog. Finding it empty, they kicked in the door anyway, ransacking the small home, breaking Etta's treasured china cup, tearing the mattress open. By the time they reached the settlement, people were emerging from their homes for morning chores. The sheriff grabbed old Parker by his shirt. "Where are they?" he demanded. "Where's the murderer and his sister?" "Don't know who you mean, Sheriff," Parker replied steadily. Broder struck him across the face with his pistol. "Caleb Turner killed my sister's boy. Shot him down like a dog." "Wasn't no shooting," a woman said quietly, "and it wasn't murder when your men hung Reverend Jonah." The sheriff spat at her feet. "Hanging trash isn't murder, it's cleaning." He turned to address the gathering crowd. $50 to whoever brings me Caleb Turner, dead or alive." Etta stepped forward from the crowd, her chin high despite the fear in her eyes. "My brother defended me from attack. Those men came to hurt children, to hurt me." "Shut your mouth, girl," Broder snarled. "Your brother murdered a white man. The law's clear on what happens next." "What law?" Etta challenged. "The law that lets men in hoods burn churches? That law?" The sheriff's face twisted with rage. He spat at her feet. "Your kind don't make the rules here." He turned to his men. "Get the dogs. We hunt him in the swamp." As the sheriff and his deputies rode away, baying hounds straining at their leashes, the people of the settlement watched in silence. In the distance, through the morning mist, the swamp waited, dark, vast, and unforgiving. Somewhere within its shadowed depths, Caleb Turner ran for his life, the sound of dogs growing louder behind him. 2 nights had passed since Caleb vanished into the swamp. Etta sat in their cabin, jumping at every sound. She had pulled the table against the door and kept a kitchen knife close. Sheriff Broder's men had already searched the place twice, breaking dishes and overturning furniture, claiming to look for evidence. What they really wanted was to terrorize her. A soft knock came at the back door. 3 taps, then 2. Etta's shoulders relaxed. She moved the chair blocking the entrance and opened it just enough to let Samuel Pike slip inside. Samuel was a weathered man in his 40s, tall and lean from years of farm work. He rarely spoke above a whisper, a habit from surviving slavery on the Whitmore plantation. Caleb had saved him during the war when Samuel was caught helping Union soldiers navigate the local swamps. "Brought you some eggs and cornmeal," Samuel said, placing a small bundle on the table. "How you holding up, Miss Etta?" "I'm managing." She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Any word?" Samuel shook his head. "Nothing certain. They got dogs in the swamp yesterday, but came back without him." A hint of pride crossed his face. "Your brother knows those waters better than their hounds." Etta wrapped her shawl tighter. "The whole town's talking. I went for water this morning, and Mrs. Jenkins crossed the street to avoid me. Like killing runs in our blood." "Let them talk," Samuel said. "Talk don't catch a man." Outside, voices approached. Samuel slipped into the back room while Etta straightened her dress and opened a Bible on the table, pretending to read. 2 white women passed by, their voices carrying through the thin walls. "Wouldn't step foot near the swamp now. 3 men gone in 2 days. Hiram Jenkins swears it wasn't just Turner. Says there's others helping him. A whole gang of them hiding out there. Lord have mercy. If they start killing white folks, where will it end?" Their voices faded. Samuel emerged from his hiding place. "Sounds like your brother's been busy." "What do they mean, 3 men gone?" Etta asked. Samuel's expression darkened. "Best you don't know details, but the Klan's getting scared. That's something to hold on to." Miles away, Deep in the swamp where cypress trees rose from black water, Caleb crouched on a moss-covered platform he'd built between three sturdy branches. From here, he could see the lantern lights of Pine Hollow in the distance while remaining invisible. The platform held his few possessions: a canteen, jerky, extra ammunition, and a small tin of medical supplies he'd taken from a Union doctor. His clothes were mud-stained for camouflage, his face streaked with clay and ash to break up its outline. Caleb had spent 2 years fighting guerrilla style for the Union. He knew how to disappear, how to let the land hide him. The swamp was his ally, dangerous to those who didn't understand it, protective to those who respected its ways. As midnight approached, he spotted what he'd been waiting for: torchlight moving along the riverbank. 5 riders in white hoods, their horses nervous in the unfamiliar terrain. They moved slowly, stopping to shine lanterns into the darkness, occasionally firing shots into the brush to flush him out. Caleb watched them calmly, assessing. They had split up from a larger group, making themselves vulnerable, amateurs playing at hunting. He slid down from his platform and moved through the water without a sound, decades of swamp knowledge guiding each step. The last rider had fallen behind, struggling with a horse that refused to cross a shallow creek. Caleb approached from downwind, a rope fashioned into a snare held ready. When the hooded man dismounted to lead his horse, Caleb struck. The snare caught the man's ankle, yanking him into the underbrush before he could cry out. One quick movement with his bayonet, and the night returned to silence. Caleb dragged the body deeper into the swamp and took the man's hood and gun. The horse he slapped on the rump, sending it running back toward town. The second rider fell even more easily. Distracted by his companion's missing horse, he never saw the shadow that rose from the water behind him. Caleb pulled him from his saddle and into the murky depths, holding him under until the bubbles stopped. The remaining 3 riders had clustered together, nervous now that 2 of their group were missing. Caleb circled them, deliberately breaking branches just outside their torchlight, drawing them deeper into the fog-shrouded wetlands. "Jeb? That you?" one called out, his voice betraying his fear. Caleb threw a stone, making it splash to their right. When they turned toward the sound, he slipped behind them. By dawn, only empty horses wandered back to Pine Hollow, saddles vacant, reins trailing. The sheriff organized a search party, but they found only blood trails leading into the deepest part of the swamp, a place local whites called the Drowning Ground. None volunteered to follow the trail beyond the first mile. The following morning broke with strange quiet over the freedmen's quarter. Etta awoke to birds singing, an ordinary sound that felt somehow extraordinary. She peered out her window cautiously, then blinked in surprise. Children were playing in the dirt road. 2 women hung laundry, laughing together. An old man sat whittling on his porch step. No white riders patrolled the edges of their settlement. No threatening faces watched from the distance. Etta wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and ventured outside. Samuel approached from his small farm, a cautious smile on his weathered face. "Morning, Miss Etta. Fine day, isn't it?" "What's happening?" she asked. "Why is everyone so free?" Samuel finished. "Word came this morning. Sheriff can't find his Klan boys. 5 went missing last night after riding out. Horses came back, men didn't." Etta pressed a hand to her mouth. "Caleb?" Samuel just nodded slightly. "Town's scared. White folks staying behind their doors today." Later that morning, Etta walked to the small cemetery where Reverend Jonah was buried. She knelt beside his grave and arranged wildflowers on the fresh dirt. "I don't know if what's happening is right," she whispered. "But I know what they did to you wasn't right either." In the woods beyond the cemetery, hidden among thick pines, Caleb watched his sister pray. Blood had dried on his hands and face, leaving rusty streaks he hadn't bothered to wash away. His eyes, once warm and quick to smile, now held the steady, unblinking gaze of a predator. He would not approach her, not yet. It wasn't safe. But seeing her stand tall in the morning light, unafraid for the first time in weeks, strengthened his resolve. Throughout Pine Hollow that day, whispers spread from porch to porch, store to store, church pew to church pew. The Klan vanished. Swamp took them. Maybe it wasn't the swamp. Maybe it was justice. For the first time since the war ended, black families walked freely down the main street, entering shops without lowering their eyes, speaking in normal voices instead of whispers. White shopkeepers served them quickly, nervously, glancing at the doors as if expecting ghosts. 3 days passed like a held breath across Pine Hollow. The sun rose and set over a town transformed by fear and uncertain freedom. White storekeepers opened late and closed early. Black families ventured into spaces previously forbidden to them, stepping carefully as if testing thin ice. This strange peace settled over everything like dust. Not true peace, just the absence of violence, the pause between lightning and thunder. On the morning of the third day, Sheriff Elias Broder stood on the courthouse steps, his face flushed with anger, as he jabbed a finger toward Mayor Silas McCready's chest. 5 men, Silas. 5 men gone without a trace. And you tell me to wait? The sheriff's voice carried across the town square where curious onlookers gathered at a safe distance. Your own brother was among the first to disappear. Mayor McCready straightened his waistcoat, his composed exterior barely containing his rage. Unlike the sheriff, who wore his emotions like his badge, the mayor preferred cold calculation. Lower your voice, Elias, McCready hissed. We need order, not panic. The federal marshal is due next week. Until then. Next week? Broder spat on the ground. Turner could kill half the town by next week. Their argument drew more spectators. White townsfolk clustered near the courthouse, while black residents watched from doorways and side streets, their expressions carefully neutral. A dust cloud appeared on the horizon, drawing all eyes. The weekly mail wagon from Montgomery approached, rattling down the main street before pulling up at the courthouse. The driver, a thin man with a perpetual squint, climbed down stiffly. Got mail for Pine Hollow, he announced, then gestured to his wagon bed. And a special delivery for Sheriff Broder. Heavy one. There in the wagon sat a wooden crate about 3 feet square, nailed shut, and addressed in bold letters. The Honorable Sheriff Broder, Pine Hollow, Alabama. The sheriff frowned. I didn't order anything. Well, somebody sent it, the driver said, wiping sweat from his brow. And I ain't carrying it back. 2 deputies lifted the crate, grunting under its weight, and placed it on the courthouse steps. A strange, sweet, sour smell emanated from it. Mayor McCready stepped back, covering his nose with a handkerchief. Open it, the sheriff ordered, drawing his pistol. One deputy pried at the lid with a crowbar until the nails screeched free. The crowd pressed closer, curiosity overwhelming caution. The sheriff kicked the lid off with his boot. A collective gasp rose from the gathered crowd. Inside the crate lay 10 blood-soaked Klan hoods, neatly folded. Beneath them, arranged in rows, were silver rings bearing the Klan insignia and crosses that had once hung around the necks of the knights. The stench of death rolled out in a wave, sending people staggering backward. Pinned to one of the hoods was a folded note. The sheriff plucked it free with trembling fingers and read it aloud. No forgiveness, no resurrection. Caleb Turner. Chaos erupted. Women screamed. Men shouted for weapons and horses. The sheriff fired his pistol into the air to restore order, but panic had already taken root. He's declaring war, someone shouted. He's already been at war, another replied. We just didn't know it. Mayor McCready seized the moment. Citizens of Pine Hollow, his voice cut through the din. This act of terror demands immediate response. I am dispatching a telegram to Governor Lindsay requesting federal troops to protect our town. The white residents cheered, while black onlookers quietly dispersed, disappearing into side streets and back to their homes. By nightfall, Pine Hollow had transformed into a ghost town. White families barricaded their doors. Not a single black face could be seen after dusk. Their windows darkened, doors locked. The town had become two separate worlds, one gripped by fear of vengeance, the other by fear of being blamed for it. In her small cabin on the edge of the freedmen's settlement, Etta Turner sat at her table grading papers by lamplight. When a soft sound caught her attention, something slipped under her door. She approached cautiously, finding a folded piece of paper on the floor. The note was brief, written in a hand she didn't recognize. "Your brother is alive. Meet at the river bend at sundown tomorrow. Come alone." Etta held the paper to the flame, watching it curl and blacken. She should ignore it. It could easily be a trap set by the sheriff. But if Caleb was truly alive? The next day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Etta taught her students as usual, though only half the children showed up. Parents were keeping their little ones close, with soldiers expected to arrive any day. As the sun began its descent, Etta wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and slipped out of the settlement, taking a winding path through the woods to avoid being seen. The river bend lay a mile away, where the water curved around a stand of ancient cypress trees. The sunset painted the water orange and gold as Etta reached the meeting place. She stood nervously at the water's edge, listening to bullfrogs and cicadas call to one another. "You shouldn't have come," a familiar voice said behind her. Etta spun around. There stood Caleb, dressed in a faded Union jacket, his face gaunt, but his eyes bright and alert. A rifle hung across his back. "Caleb!" She rushed to embrace him, then stepped back, taking in the changes 3 weeks had wrought. He was thinner, harder, his movements precise as a hunting cat's. "I thought you might be dead." "Sometimes I think I am," he replied. "The man who came home from war died the night they hung Reverend Jonah." "What have you done?" Etta whispered, though she already knew. Caleb's gaze didn't waver. "What needed doing? Every man I took was there the night they burned the church. Everyone had blood on his hands. The box you sent to town. Let them know what happens to night riders. Let them feel what we've felt. Terror that comes without warning." Etta gripped his arms. "The mayor has called for soldiers. They'll hunt you down. They'll kill you, Caleb. Let them try." His voice was flat. "I know these swamps better than any soldier they'll send. I can keep this up for months. And then what?" Tears filled Etta's eyes. "You kill them all? Become what they are?" For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Caleb's face. "I'm fighting for our people. Our people need peace, not more bloodshed." She clutched his hands. "Please, Caleb, stop this before more blood spills. Come home." "Home?" He gave a bitter laugh. "There's no home for men like me anymore. Just war that changes shape." A distant sound caught his attention. Horses approaching on the main road. Caleb tilted his head, listening. "Soldiers," he said. "Already here." Etta's heart sank. "Will you at least think about what I said?" Caleb pulled her into a tight embrace, his body solid and warm against hers. For just a moment, she felt the brother she remembered, not this hard-eyed avenger the war had created. Then he was gone, slipping into the cypress shadows without a sound. Etta stood alone at the river bend, watching torchlight glint across the dark water. In the distance, she could hear the soldiers entering Pine Hollow, their horses' hooves like drumbeats on the packed dirt road. She knew with cold certainty that Caleb's war had only begun, and caught between his justice and the law's vengeance stood everyone she loved. The morning sun burned away the river mist as Pine Hollow stirred to life. Soldiers patrolled the streets, their blue uniforms a stark contrast to the dusty buildings. They moved in pairs, rifles at the ready, eyeing every shadow as if Caleb Turner might materialize from thin air. A black carriage rolled into town, pulled by two matching chestnut horses. It stopped before the courthouse, where Sheriff Broder waited, thumbs hooked in his belt loops. The carriage door opened, and out stepped a tall man in a long coat. A silver marshal's badge gleamed on his chest. His face bore the weathered look of someone who had seen too much war and not enough peace. Marshal Edwin Pierce, he introduced himself, voice gravelly but measured. Federal Office, Montgomery Division. Sheriff Broder spat a stream of tobacco juice near the marshal's polished boots. Took you long enough. 5 missing men takes precedence over your usual complaints about freedmen, Sheriff. Marshal Pierce surveyed the town with sharp eyes. I understand there's been quite a disturbance. Disturbance? Broder's face reddened. A murdering Negroes hunting white men like animals? And you call it a disturbance? Pierce ignored the outburst. I'll need to speak with witnesses, starting with the schoolteacher, Turner's sister. Waste of time, Broder muttered. She won't say nothing useful. I'll decide what's useful. Pierce nodded toward the soldiers. These men report to me now, not you. Remember that. He left the sheriff sputtering and made his way to the small schoolhouse at the edge of the freedmen's settlement. Children stopped their play to stare at him, their eyes wide with caution. Etta Turner stood in the doorway of the one-room school, arms crossed. She wore a simple blue dress, her hair pulled back neatly. Nothing about her suggested she was related to the most wanted man in Alabama. Miss Turner? Pierce removed his hat. Marshal Edwin Pierce. I'd like to ask you some questions about your brother. My students are waiting, Marshal. Her voice was calm but firm. We're learning about numbers today. This won't take long. He glanced at the children inside. Perhaps somewhere private? Etta hesitated, then called to an older girl. Sarah, lead the counting practice. I'll be right outside. They walked to a bench beneath a gnarled oak tree. Neither sat. When did you last see your brother, Miss Turner? The night he ran into the swamp. Her eyes never wavered. Sheriff Broder wanted to hang him without trial. And you've had no contact since? Would I tell you if I had? Pierce studied her. There was steel beneath her calm exterior. 5 men are missing, possibly dead. Your brother claimed responsibility. Did he? A flicker of something, pride, fear, crossed her face. Strange how folks worry about missing men now. When black children disappeared during slavery, no marshals came asking questions. I'm not here to debate history, Miss Turner. Aren't you? She looked toward the cemetery where Reverend Jonah lay buried. Some spirits don't rest easy, Marshal Pierce. Not when justice sleeps too long. Pierce recognized the deflection but didn't press. He'd learn more from what she didn't say than what she did. Thank you for your time. He replaced his hat. I may have more questions later. We'll be here, she said, returning to her students, learning our numbers. That afternoon, Pierce met with Mayor McCready in his well-appointed office. The mayor offered brandy, which Pierce declined. This Turner fellow, McCready said, swirling his own glass, was always trouble. Came back from the war with ideas. What kind of ideas? Pierce asked. Equality, voting rights. McCready's lip curled, stirring up the coloreds who were perfectly content before. Pierce noted the mayor's expensive suit, the gold rings on his fingers. I understand your brother was among the first to disappear. McCready's face hardened. Jeb was young, impulsive, but he didn't deserve what happened. And what exactly did happen? That animal Turner gutted him like a fish. McCready slammed his glass down, then started picking off good men one by one. Good men who happened to ride at night wearing hoods? The mayor's eyes narrowed. You sound sympathetic to a murderer, Marshal. I'm sympathetic to facts. Pierce stood, which seem in short supply here. Later, Pierce sat with Sheriff Broder in the jailhouse, reviewing reports. The sheriff drank steadily from a flask. How many men in the local Klan chapter? Pierce asked casually. Broder's head snapped up. How would I know? You're the sheriff. You know everything that happens in Pine Hollow. I enforce the law. What men do in their private time ain't my concern. Pierce leaned forward. 5 citizens disappearing is very much your concern. Or should be. Something in Broder's eyes, a flicker of calculation, caught Pierce's attention. The sheriff knew more than he was saying. That night, after reporting to his men, Pierce slipped out of his quarters. He followed Sheriff Broder, who rode out of town alone just after midnight. The full moon cast enough light for Pierce to track him without being seen. Broder rode to an abandoned barn 2 miles outside town. 5 horses were already tethered outside. Pierce crept closer, positioning himself beneath a broken window. Inside, Broder met with 5 men, their faces illuminated by lantern light. Pierce recognized the mayor's clerk, the banker, and 3 farmers. "Turner's picking us off one by one," one man said, panic edging his voice. "Keep your voice down," Broder hissed. "The marshal has men everywhere." "What about the sister?" another suggested. "She knows where he's hiding." Broder nodded slowly. "We grab her tomorrow night. Turner will come for her." "And then?" the banker asked. "Then we finish what we started." Broder's voice hardened. "No witnesses this time." Pierce slipped away, troubled by what he'd heard. This was no longer just about finding Caleb Turner. It was about preventing more bloodshed on both sides. For the next 2 days, Pierce mapped the patterns of violence. A gun shipment for the sheriff mysteriously exploded in the night. A barrel of whiskey shared among the remaining Klansmen left 3 violently ill. And at each scene, Caleb left his signature, pieces of burned rope, the same kind used to hang black men. Using his tracking skills from the war, Pierce followed faint trails into the swamp. On the 3rd day, as fog settled among the cypress trees, he sensed, rather than saw, someone watching him. "Marshal Pierce," a voice called softly from the mist. "You're a long way from your soldiers." Pierce turned slowly. Caleb Turner stood 20 yards away, rifle ready, but not aimed. "You're a hard man to find, Turner." Pierce kept his hands visible, away from his holstered pistol. "Not hard enough, it seems." Caleb's eyes were watchful, calculating. "What do you want?" "To understand why a decorated Union soldier became an executioner." "I didn't start this war," Caleb replied. "I just refused to lose it." They studied each other. 2 veterans who had fought for the same cause, but now stood on opposite sides of the law. "They're planning to take your sister," Pierce said finally. "Tomorrow night." Surprise flickered across Caleb's face. Then anger. "Why tell me this?" "Because I don't want more bodies." Pierce slowly removed his hat. "I fought for freedom, too. Just don't burn the world trying to fix it." Caleb's grip tightened on his rifle. For a moment, Pierce thought he might shoot. Instead, he simply turned and walked into the fog, disappearing among the cypress shadows without answering. Pierce stood alone, the weight of his badge suddenly heavy. Tomorrow would force him to choose between duty and what he knew was right. The law demanded Caleb's capture, but the law had failed Pine Hollow long before Caleb took justice into his own hands. 2 weeks passed like a fever dream in Pine Hollow. The summer heat pressed down, making everyone short-tempered and suspicious. Marshal Pierce kept his soldiers patrolling the freedmen's quarter, protecting Etta's school. The remaining white families locked their doors at night, jumping at shadows. No one had seen Caleb Turner. Some whispered he'd fled to the north. Others swore they'd seen his silhouette watching from the forest edge. The only certainty was the growing tension that hung over Pine Hollow like the storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Rain started falling around dusk, gentle at first, then becoming a downpour that turned dirt roads to mud and drummed against tin roofs. Most folks stayed home, doors barred against the weather, and whatever else might come calling in the dark. In the old tobacco barn 1/2 mile outside town, lanterns flickered behind shuttered windows. Sheriff Broder's horse was tethered under an overhang, alongside Mayor McCready's fine bay and 5 other mounts. Their owners huddled inside, passing a bottle of whiskey as thunder rolled overhead. "This can't continue," Broder said, his voice slightly slurred. He'd been drinking since noon. "That Union bastard Pierce has his men everywhere. Can't even take a piss without some bluebelly watching." Mayor McCready nodded, his face flushed with drink and anger. "My brother's been in the ground 2 weeks, while that murderer walks free. Turner's a ghost," the banker added, nervously fingering his watch chain. "Appears and disappears like smoke. My teller swears he saw him watching the bank yesterday." "He's just a man," Broder spat. "And men bleed when you shoot them." Above them in the rafters, concealed by shadows and the noise of the rain, Caleb Turner lay perfectly still. He'd been waiting since afternoon, slipping in through the loose boards at the back. Every muscle ached from the cramped position, but his face remained impassive as he listened. "We need a message they won't forget," McCready said, spreading a crude map on a barrel top. "Something to put these people back in their place." "What are you suggesting, Silas?" asked the Methodist preacher, the newest Klan recruit. McCready's smile was cold in the lantern light. "A cleansing fire. The freedmen's settlement. Etta Turner's school. All of it. Burn it to the ground while they sleep." "That's over 50 people," the preacher protested weakly. 50 problems solved," Broder countered. "We blame it on lightning. With Turner's sister gone, he'll have no reason to stay. We reclaim our town, and things go back to the way they were." "The marshal," someone began, "won't be here forever," McCready finished. "Washington will recall him once things quiet down. Then Pine Hollow returns to being a proper Southern town, free from Negro influence." Murmurs of agreement rose as McCready outlined their plan. Saturday night, when the freedmen gathered for prayer meeting, set fires at multiple points, block the exits, make it look like an accident. In the rafters, Caleb's hand tightened on the knife at his belt. They were planning a massacre, worse than anything he'd seen during the war. His gaze moved to the floor beneath their feet, where he'd spent hours earlier that day carefully spreading lamp oil between the boards. He'd come planning to kill them one by one, but their words changed everything. This wasn't about personal vengeance anymore. This was about preventing a slaughter. "Tomorrow night we gather the rest of our brothers," Broder was saying. "By Sunday, this problem is solved permanently." Caleb reached into his pocket, removing a small box of matches. The men below were too deep in their planning to notice the soft scratch as he struck one against the rafter. The tiny flame flickered in his hand. In its glow, his face looked carved from stone. "For Etta," he whispered, then dropped the match. It fell between the boards directly over the oil-soaked floor. For a moment, nothing happened. Then flames erupted beneath the men's feet, spreading with unnatural speed along invisible trails. "Fire!" someone screamed. The men leaped up, knocking over lanterns that shattered and fed the blaze. Caleb moved quickly now, sliding down a support beam at the back. As the men rushed for the main doors, he slipped outside through his hidden entrance and raced around to the front. The wooden bar he'd prepared earlier slid neatly into place, locking the doors from outside. Screams rose above the drumming rain. Fists pounded against the doors. Caleb stepped back, watching flames lick up the wooden walls as the men inside realized they were trapped. "No forgiveness," he murmured, rain washing down his face like tears he couldn't shed. "No resurrection." He stood in the field, watching the barn become an inferno. The rain couldn't compete with the fire's hunger. Inside, the screams grew desperate, then fewer, then stopped altogether. Only the fire's roar remained, and the whisper of Etta's name on his lips. Hoofbeats splashed through mud behind him. Caleb didn't turn, even as Marshal Pierce dismounted and ran toward him. "My God, Turner!" Pierce gasped, staring at the blazing barn. "What have you done?" "Justice," Caleb answered simply. A crash from inside the barn, part of the roof collapsing. Then, impossibly, A pounding at a small side door Caleb hadn't known about. Pierce ran toward it, and after a moment's hesitation, Caleb followed. Together, they broke the door open. Thick smoke billowed out. Inside, Mayor McCready crawled toward them, his clothes burning, his face black with soot. Pierce grabbed his shoulders while Caleb took his legs, and they dragged him into the rain. McCready's breaths came in tortured gasps. His skin was blistered red and black, where flames had touched him. The rain seemed to cause him more pain, not less. "You," he wheezed, recognizing Caleb. His burned hand clutched Pierce's sleeve. "She's gone. Took her." "Who's gone?" Pierce demanded, bending closer. "Turner's sister," McCready coughed, blood bubbling at his lips. "Fairview Plantation." Caleb's blood ran cold. "When?" he demanded, gripping McCready's shirt. "When did they take her?" "Yesterday," McCready whispered, a terrible smile stretching his burned face. "They're waiting for you." Pierce looked up at Caleb, understanding dawning. "It's a trap." "I know." Caleb stood, checking his rifle. Behind them, the barn was fully engulfed, its timbers cracking like gunshots in the heat. The bodies of Broader and the others were beyond recovery now. Fairview Plantation lay 5 miles east, abandoned since the war. Once the crown jewel of the county, now just a rotting shell where ghosts walked. "Turner, wait!" Pierce called as Caleb turned toward the tree line. "You can't go alone. Let me gather my men." "They'll kill her if they see soldiers coming," Caleb said without turning. Rain plastered his shirt to his back, revealing the scars from whips that had crossed his skin long ago. "This is between them and me. At least, let me come with you," Pierce insisted. "2 guns are better than 1. Caleb paused at the edge of the trees, looking back at the marshal and the burning barn that contained what remained of Pine Hollow's power structure. "Your place is here," he said finally. Someone needs to tell the truth about what happened." Before Pierce could respond, Caleb disappeared into the darkness of the forest, moving like a shadow between raindrops. The road to Fairview Plantation burned into his memory like the hatred in his heart. The storm grew fiercer as darkness fell. Lightning split the sky in jagged lines, illuminating Caleb's path through the woods. Rain lashed against his face, washing away sweat and tears alike. He moved with the silent precision of a man who had learned to survive in hostile territory, each step purposeful despite the mud that sucked at his boots. Fairview Plantation appeared through the trees like a rotting tooth in a dead mouth. Once grand, the main house now sagged under years of neglect. White paint peeled from its columns. Half the windows were shattered, their broken glass teeth gleaming in the lightning flashes. The surrounding slave quarters had mostly collapsed, reclaimed by kudzu and moss. Caleb paused at the edge of the clearing, scanning for movement. The only sounds were the hammering rain on the tin roof and the creak of a shutter banging against a window frame. His soldier's instincts screamed danger, but something else pulled him forward. A faint, rhythmic sound beneath the storm's fury. Sobbing. A woman's soft crying. "Etta," he whispered, grip tightening on his rifle. He advanced toward the house in a crouch, moving from shadow to shadow. The front steps groaned beneath his weight as he climbed onto the porch. Water pooled in the sagging boards. The grand door hung partially open, swaying gently in the wind. Caleb pressed his back against the wall and listened. The sobbing came from somewhere behind the house, not inside. He slipped through the entrance hall, past rooms where fine furniture lay covered in dust and cobwebs. His boots left wet prints on floors that once gleamed with polish. The back door opened onto an overgrown garden, barely visible through sheets of rain. Beyond it stood a massive oak tree, its branches twisted against the stormy sky like gnarled fingers. Lightning flashed, and Caleb's heart stopped. A figure hung from the lowest branch, spinning slowly in the wind. "No," he breathed. "No, no, no." He ran through the downpour, rifle dropping forgotten in the mud. As he drew closer, the horrible truth became clear. Etta hung from a coarse rope, her teacher's dress soaked through, her feet bare. Her eyes were closed, face peaceful despite the violence done to her. Caleb fell to his knees beneath her body, a sound escaping his throat that wasn't human, part howl, part prayer. His fingers clawed at the mud as rain mixed with his tears. "Etta," he moaned, "little sister." Lightning illuminated the scene in stark white. This same oak was where their mother had been whipped for teaching them letters, decades ago. The master had tied her to this trunk, laid the lash across her back until she couldn't stand. Now her daughter hung from its branches, killed for the same crime, daring to teach others to read. The sobbing continued. It wasn't Etta. It came from a small bundle tucked against the tree's massive trunk. A young black girl, one of Etta's students, bound and gagged but alive. Her wide eyes found Caleb's, pleading. Caleb cut her free with shaking hands. "Who did this?" he asked, voice barely audible. "Sheriff," the girl whispered through tears. "He made me watch. Said to tell you they're waiting at the church tomorrow." Caleb looked up at his sister's body. "How long?" "Since yesterday morning," the child sobbed. She was brave, didn't beg. Fury and grief warred in Caleb's chest. He sent the girl running for the freedmen's settlement, then turned back to Etta. With gentle hands, he cut her down, catching her body as it fell. He held her close, rocking back and forth as the storm raged around them. By dawn, the rain had stopped. Pale light crept across the plantation grounds, revealing Caleb digging beneath the oak with a rusty shovel he'd found in the old slave quarters. His face was blank, movements mechanical. The hole grew steadily larger. He wrapped Etta in his own jacket before laying her in the earth. From his pocket, he took the wooden cross necklace his wife had made, placing it in Etta's folded hands. "I'm sorry I wasn't there," he whispered. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you." As he covered her with soil, Caleb's resolve hardened. The men who did this would pay, not just with their lives, but with their legacy. Pine Hollow itself would burn before he was finished. After patting down the final layer of earth, Caleb took his knife and carved Etta's name deep into the oak's bark. Beneath it, he added, "She taught us to be free." He was placing wildflowers on the fresh grave when hoofbeats approached. Caleb didn't reach for his rifle. Something in him had broken and reformed, harder and colder than before. Marshal Pierce rode into view, followed by 6 soldiers. Their uniforms were splattered with mud from hard riding. Pierce dismounted first, hat in hand, face grim. "Turner," he said quietly, eyes moving to the fresh grave. "I'm sorry." The soldiers fanned out, rifles raised. Pierce motioned for them to lower their weapons. "It doesn't have to end in more bloodshed," Pierce said. "Come back with me. Stand trial." "I'll testify what these men were planning." Caleb stood slowly, eyes never leaving Etta's grave. "There is no justice in your courts for people like me." "Maybe not," Pierce admitted, "but there's a difference between justice and vengeance." "Not anymore," Caleb replied. A voice called from the trees behind them. "That's far enough, Turner." Sheriff Broder emerged from the forest edge, rifle aimed. His face was red with exertion and anger. Behind Pierce, the soldiers raised their weapons again. "I thought you died in the fire," Caleb said, strangely calm. "Disappointed?" Broder snarled. "I left early, had business here." He gestured toward the grave with his rifle barrel. Pierce stepped between them. "Put the gun down, Broder. You're interfering with federal business. This nigger killed the mayor and half the town council." Broder spat. "He's mine to hang." The rifle cracked before anyone could move. The bullet tore through Caleb's left shoulder, spinning him backward. He didn't cry out, just clutched the wound and dove for the trees as the soldiers scrambled to respond. "Hold your fire!" Pierce shouted, but more shots rang out, splintering bark where Caleb had disappeared. By the time Pierce reached the tree line, Caleb was gone. Blood droplets marked his path into the swamp, then vanished at the water's edge. Broder ran up, reloading. "After him!" Pierce grabbed the sheriff's rifle. "That's enough! He's getting away." "Let him!" Pierce said firmly. "Enough people have died." The soldiers searched the swamp's edge, but found nothing. Caleb Turner had vanished like morning mist. When they finally left, Pierce returned alone to Etta's grave. He knelt beside it, removing his hat in respect. His fingers dug into the soil, retrieving the spent bullet casing that had fallen during the shooting. He turned it over in his palm, then pocketed it with a heavy sigh. His orders were clear: restore order to Pine Hollow by any means necessary, but some wounds ran too deep for law to heal. "I'll end this quietly," he promised the fresh grave, "for both your sakes." But as he looked toward the swamp where Caleb had disappeared, Pierce knew justice had moved beyond his reach. What came next would be written in blood, not law. Sunday morning broke over Pine Hollow with a strange, cruel beauty. The storm had finally passed, leaving the air scrubbed clean, and the mud-churned streets steaming in the sudden sunshine. First Baptist Church stood proudly on the town square, its white steeple gleaming against the blue sky, stained glass windows reflecting rainbow patterns onto the walkway below. The church bells rang out at 10 o'clock, summoning the faithful. Men in pressed suits walked with their wives in silk dresses and ribboned bonnets, children trailing behind in their Sunday best. They climbed the wide wooden steps, nodding and smiling to each other as they entered through the double doors. Inside, the sanctuary glowed with morning light. Sun streamed through the colored glass, painting the faces of saints and apostles across polished pews. The smell of beeswax candles and pine floor polish hung in the air. Mayor McCready sat in the front row, his face still bandaged from the barn fire. Despite his injuries, he'd insisted on attending service, a show of strength and normalcy. His left hand trembled slightly as he nodded to townsfolk. Sheriff Broder took his place beside the mayor, his deputy on the other side. The rest of the front pews filled with the town's elite: the banker, the mill owner, the physician, and their families. Behind the pulpit, Reverend Thomas Whitfield arranged his Bible and sermon notes, occasionally glancing at the congregation with a tight smile. His eyes lingered on the empty seats in the back rows where some families hadn't appeared. Fear kept many home today. "Blessed Sunday, brothers and sisters," the Reverend began as the clock struck 10:30. "We gather in trying times, but the Lord remains our shepherd." The congregation murmured their amens. The organ played softly as the choir rose to sing. Sunlight shifted across the floor as clouds passed overhead. No one noticed the figure slipping through the side door by the choir entrance. No one saw him move like a shadow behind the baptismal font. The hymn ended. Reverend Whitfield stepped forward, opening his Bible with practiced reverence. Today's sermon comes from the Book of Revelation. A tremendous bang cut him off as the main doors slammed shut. Women gasped. Men turned in their seats. A second bang followed as the side door closed too. In the sudden silence that followed, they all heard the unmistakable sound of a heavy wooden bar dropping into place, locking the main entrance. "What in God's name?" the Reverend whispered. At the back of the church stood Caleb Turner. His clothes were ragged and blood-stained. His left shoulder was crudely bandaged. Around his neck hung a thick coil of rope, the same kind used for lynchings. His eyes burned with fevered intensity as he surveyed the congregation. In his right hand, he held a glowing lantern. "Keep preaching, Reverend," Caleb said, his voice steady and clear. "I believe the good book speaks about Judgment Day." Sheriff Broder reached for his pistol, but Caleb raised the lantern higher. "I wouldn't," he warned. "This oil burns quick and hot." The congregation sat frozen, terror rippling across their faces. Caleb moved slowly down the center aisle, the rope swinging with each step. "You all know me," he said. But you don't know my sister's name, or Reverend Jonah's, or my mother's, or any of the people you've buried over the years." He stopped halfway to the altar. Etta Turner taught children to read. My mother before her did the same. Both died for it, hanging from the same tree, 30 years apart. The lantern light cast strange shadows across his face. "I came home from war thinking things would be different. That's what we fought for, wasn't it, Mayor? Freedom. Justice. Or was that just for some folks?" Mayor McCready's bandaged face had gone pale. "Turner, please. My wife died waiting for me to come home," Caleb continued as if he hadn't heard. "Jonah Fields was teaching children the same lessons Christ taught. Love your neighbor. Do unto others. You hung him for it." He reached the front pew now. The sheriff's hand inched toward his gun again. "Don't," Caleb warned. "I'm already dead. Question is how many I take with me." The wooden walls of the church creaked in the sudden silence. Outside, birds sang, oblivious to the drama within. "You buried my people beneath this soil and called it holy ground," Caleb said, his voice shaking now with emotion. "Today, the earth remembers." With deliberate movement, he uncorked the lantern and splashed oil across the velvet curtains behind the altar. The Reverend stumbled backward, Bible clutched to his chest. "Turner, for God's sake!" someone shouted. "God's taking a rest today," Caleb replied. "It's my turn to preach." He struck a match against the pew. The flame danced between his fingers for a moment before he tossed it onto the oil-soaked curtains. They ignited with a whoosh, flames climbing greedily up the fabric. Panic erupted. People scrambled from pews, rushing for doors they quickly found locked. Sheriff Broder fired his pistol, the shot going wild as people pushed past him. The bullet shattered a stained glass window, but did nothing to stop the spreading fire. Caleb stood in the center aisle watching the chaos with eerie calm. The rope around his neck seemed to glow in the firelight. "My sister's name was Etta," he said again, though few were listening now. "Remember it when you pray for salvation." Outside the church, Marshal Pierce was crossing the square when he heard the gunshot. He saw smoke beginning to curl from the windows. Breaking into a run, he reached the steps just as flames became visible through the shattered stained glass. He threw his weight against the doors, but they wouldn't budge. Through a window, he caught glimpses of panicked faces, of smoke filling the sanctuary. "The side door!" he shouted to bystanders. "Break it down!" But fire had already claimed that entrance, flames licking up the white clapboard siding. Inside, Caleb walked through the chaos, touching the flame to pews, hymnals, anything that would burn. The rope around his neck was beginning to smolder. Sheriff Broder tackled him from behind, sending them both crashing into a row of seats. "Devil!" Broder screamed, hands closing around Caleb's throat. Caleb didn't fight back. He smiled through bloodied teeth and whispered, "See you there." The roof timbers cracked overhead, weakened by the intense heat. With a terrible groaning, the ceiling began to collapse. Outside, Marshal Pierce and several men managed to break through a window, helping women and children climb out to safety. Thick black smoke poured from every opening now. The steeple swayed, then toppled with a thunderous crash. Pierce counted the survivors huddled on the lawn. Mayor McCready was among them, coughing and sobbing. So were many of the congregation's women and children. But the sheriff was nowhere to be seen. By the time the bucket brigade formed, it was too late. The church burned like a pyre, flames reaching skyward as if in terrible prayer. The heat drove everyone back across the square. Marshal Pierce stood apart from the others, watching the destruction. His face was streaked with soot, his uniform singed. "He was in there!" McCready gasped, clutching Pierce's arm. "Turner! He locked us in!" Pierce said nothing, eyes fixed on the burning building. "Did you see him escape?" someone asked. "No," Pierce answered quietly, "and I don't think he meant to." As the walls collapsed inward and the fire reached its peak, Pierce removed his hat. Something like respect crossed his face. Maybe that's what salvation looks like after all. 6 weeks after the church fire, Pine Hollow barely resembled the town it once was. The charred skeleton of First Baptist stood as a blackened monument with no one daring to clear the ruins. Weeds had already begun to push through the ashes, nature reclaiming what man had destroyed. A line of federal wagons rolled down the main street, kicking up dust. Blue-coated soldiers sat stiffly on their mounts, rifles across their laps. At their head rode a stern-faced colonel with a waxed mustache and orders from Washington to restore order to the troubled region. Marshal Pierce waited on the steps of the courthouse, his hat in his hands. The circles under his eyes had deepened these past weeks, his uniform hanging looser on his frame. "Colonel Hathaway," Pierce greeted as the officer dismounted. "Welcome to Pine Hollow." The colonel surveyed the quiet street with narrowed eyes. "I expected more disturbance." "There's been none, sir," Pierce replied. "Not for weeks now. I heard reports of Negro insurrection, vigilante justice, entire families missing." Pierce nodded toward the courthouse doors. "Perhaps we should discuss inside, Colonel." The interior was cool and still. Maps of the county spread across tables where once the mayor and sheriff had plotted raids. Now those same tables held ledgers and documents bearing the signatures of the newly formed Pine Hollow Council, all freedmen elected by their community. "Where's the mayor?" Hathaway demanded. "And the sheriff?" Pierce's face remained impassive. "Gone, sir, along with several others. The fire claimed them. And who's running things now?" "The people who remained," Pierce said simply. He handed the colonel a neatly written report. "You'll find everything in order. Land deeds properly recorded. Taxes collected. Schools reopened." The colonel's eyebrows rose as he scanned the pages. These signatures, the Pine Hollow Council. 7 elected members, all local residents. "All colored," the colonel noted sharply. "All qualified," Pierce corrected. "And the only ones who stayed to rebuild." Through the windows, they could see the soldiers setting up camp in the square. Locals passed by, going about their business with cautious glances at the newcomers. There were no white faces among them. "Where did they all go?" Hathaway asked finally. Pierce shrugged. "Some to Montgomery, some further north. Fear has a way of making men restless. And the Klan activity?" "Ceased entirely. My report states as much." The colonel sat heavily in what had once been the mayor's chair. "Washington doesn't believe a terror organization simply disappears. Sometimes fire cleanses," Pierce said quietly. "The local terror groups have disbanded permanently. That's all Washington needs to know." Across town, in the rebuilt schoolhouse, Martha Johnson wrote carefully on the blackboard. She was younger than Etta had been, with the same gentle determination in her eyes. Children filled the benches before her, their faces eager despite all they had witnessed. "Today," she said, turning to face them, "we remember Miss Turner's words." She stepped aside to reveal the phrase now written in chalk. "Freedom is not given. It is made." "What does this mean?" she asked the silent room. A small boy in the front row raised his hand. "It means we have to build it ourselves." Martha nodded, smiling. "That's right, James. And that's exactly what we're doing here." From her desk, she lifted Etta's notebooks, salvaged from the cabin after her death. The pages were worn, but the handwriting clear. Lesson plans, stories, poems, all dedicated to the children of Pine Hollow. "Miss Turner believed knowledge was our greatest weapon," Martha continued. "Not guns or fire, but what we carry in our minds." The children nodded solemnly. Many had lost parents or siblings to the violence. All had seen too much. Outside the schoolhouse window, federal troops marched past. Martha watched them without expression before returning to her lesson. At dusk, Marshal Pierce rode alone to the edge of town, following a narrow path into the pine woods. The trail wound past the old Turner cabin, now tended by Samuel Pike and his family, until it reached a small clearing. Two simple wooden markers stood beneath an oak tree. One read, Etta Turner, Teacher of Freedom. The other bore no name, just a carved Union emblem. Beside it, carefully preserved under glass, lay a set of dog tags and a bayonet. Pierce dismounted, removing his hat. "They're saying you're still out there," he said to the empty air. "Folks claim they see your shadow at night, keeping watch." Wind stirred the branches overhead. Pierce knelt and placed a small bundle of wildflowers between the graves. "I've made sure no one will disturb this place," he continued. "No official record, no map marking. Some legends protect better than any law." He stood, brushing dirt from his knees. "Your sister would be proud, Turner. The school's full again. The council meets regular. Pine Hollow's becoming something new." As Pierce mounted his horse, he paused for one last look at the unmarked grave. "Rest now, soldier. Your war is done." Dawn broke clear and golden over Pine Hollow. The first rays of sunlight touched the new bell tower rising from the freedmen's settlement. It wasn't grand like the old church had been, just a simple wooden structure with walls of fresh-cut pine. But it stood proudly on the open field where once Reverend Jonah had preached. Families gathered slowly, dressed in their finest clothes. Children ran ahead, playing in the dewy grass. Elderly men and women walked arm in arm, their faces lifted to the morning light. Samuel Pike, now head of the council, stood beside the new bell. When the sun cleared the tree line, he pulled the rope gently. The bell rang out, clear and strong. Once, twice, 3 times. Its sound echoed across the valley, across the pine woods, across the fields where generations had labored in chains. "For Reverend Jonah," Samuel said, his voice carrying to the assembled people. "For Teacher Etta. For Caleb Turner." The congregation bowed their heads in silence. Martha Johnson stood among them, Etta's Bible clutched in her hands. Beside her, the children of Pine Hollow waited, solemn but unafraid. "Today we begin again," Samuel continued. "Today we build what was promised." As they filed into the new church, Marshal Pierce watched from the edge of the woods. His time in Pine Hollow was ending. Transfer papers waited in his saddlebag, but he had stayed long enough to see this moment. The bell rang once more, calling all to gather. Its sound carried into the pine woods where, some still whispered, a watchful ghost kept vigil. But today, at least, all of Pine Hollow's ghosts could rest. The living had taken up their burden. Pierce touched his hat in a final salute and turned his horse toward the rising sun. The summer heat shimmered over Pine Hollow in waves, bending the horizon like a mirage. 10 years had passed since the burning of First Baptist Church. The town had changed in ways both subtle and profound. White-painted fences now bordered neat yards where children played. The main street boasted a row of businesses, a cobbler, a dressmaker, a print shop, all with black proprietors who stood proudly in their doorways. A rider appeared on the dusty road leading into town. He was a lean man with reddish whiskers streaked with gray, riding a chestnut mare that had seen better days. His clothes marked him as neither rich nor poor, just another traveler passing through the Alabama countryside. A worn leather saddlebag bounced against his thigh as the horse ambled toward the center of Pine Hollow. Henry Cobb had been riding for 2 days straight, his back aching from the saddle. He'd heard stories about this town, whispers in Montgomery about a place where the old order had been overturned, where freedmen governed themselves without interference. Some called it a miracle, others named it an abomination. Henry merely found it curious. He dismounted outside the general store, tethering his mare to the hitching post. A hand-painted sign above the door read, "Pine Hollow General Goods," in careful lettering. The porch was swept clean, with 2 rocking chairs set on either side of the entrance. A bell jingled softly as Henry pushed open the door. The interior was cool and dim after the glaring sunlight, smelling pleasantly of coffee beans, leather, and tobacco. Shelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling, neatly stocked with everything from canned goods to yard goods to farm tools. Behind the counter stood an old man with a full gray beard. He moved with a pronounced limp as he arranged jars of candy, his weathered hands moving with methodical precision. When he glanced up at Henry, his eyes were dark and watchful, set deep in a face carved by years of sun and hardship. "Afternoon," the old man said, his voice low and measured. "What can I help you with today?" Henry removed his hat, running a hand through his sweat-dampened hair. "Coffee and tobacco, if you've got it." "Been on the road a spell." The shopkeeper nodded, limping around the counter to fetch the items. As he moved, Henry noticed the way his right leg dragged slightly, as though an old injury had never properly healed. "Passing through?" the old man asked, reaching for a tin of coffee beans. "Heading to Montgomery," Henry replied, looking around the store with interest. "Never been to Pine Hollow before. Heard talk about it, though." The shopkeeper's hands paused briefly before continuing their work. "That's so. What kind of talk?" Henry shrugged, leaning against the counter. "This and that. Folks say it's different here, peaceful. Run by colored folks, mostly." "We just call ourselves folks," the old man said mildly, weighing out the coffee. "No need for extra words." Henry nodded, watching as the shopkeeper measured tobacco into a small pouch. Through the window he could see children playing in the schoolyard across the street. Black and white children together, their laughter carrying through the open door. "Strange sight," Henry muttered, almost to himself. The old man followed his gaze. "Children playing? Nothing strange about that." "Together, I mean," Henry clarified. "Don't see that much where I'm from." The shopkeeper placed the coffee and tobacco on the counter. "That'll be 65 cents. Henry counted out the coins, still looking thoughtfully out the window. Must have taken some doing, making a town like this. Heard there was trouble here once. The old man's eyes flicked up to Henry's face, assessing. Every place has its stories, but not like Pine Hollows, Henry pressed. They say there was a man, a colored Union soldier, who haunted these woods, took down the Klan single-handed. Like a ghost. A faint smile touched the corners of the shopkeeper's mouth. Sounds like a tall tale to me. Maybe so. But something happened here. Town feels different. Not a whisper of trouble in years, from what I hear. The old man wrapped Henry's purchases in brown paper, tying them with string. His movements were practiced, efficient, despite his stiff fingers. "Ain't no ghosts here," he said quietly, passing the package across the counter. "We laid them all down proper." Something in his tone made Henry look more closely at the shopkeeper's face, at the deep furrows around his eyes, the set of his jaw, the careful neutrality of his expression. "You been here long?" Henry asked. "Long enough," the old man replied. "Since after the war." Henry nodded slowly, tucking his purchases into his coat pocket. "Well, it's a fine town you folks have built here. Doesn't seem natural, but fine all the same." The shopkeeper met his gaze steadily. "Nothing unnatural about peace, mister. Just takes work to keep it." Henry placed his hat back on his head, nodding his thanks. As he turned to leave, he noticed a framed newspaper clipping on the wall, yellowed with age, showing a group of men and women standing proudly before a newly built schoolhouse. The headline read, "Pine Hollow Freedmen Establish First Self-Governed Council in County." The bell jingled again as Henry stepped out into the sunlight. He untethered his horse, glancing back at the store one last time before mounting. The shopkeeper stood in the doorway watching him, one hand resting on the doorframe, his expression unreadable. Inside the store, the old man listened to the receding hoofbeats. When silence returned, he moved to the back room behind a curtain of blue calico. The space was small but tidy. A cot against one wall, a small table with a basin and pitcher, a trunk at the foot of the bed. Above the trunk hung an old Union rifle, its wood polished by years of careful handling. Beside it, In a simple frame was a sepia photograph of a young woman with intelligent eyes and a gentle smile. Her hair was pulled back neatly, and she wore a high-collared dress with a small cross at her throat. The old man reached up, his fingers brushing the smooth stock of the rifle. He placed his palm flat against the wood and exhaled slowly, his shoulders dropping as if releasing a long-held burden. Outside, distant thunder rumbled across the summer sky. The first fat raindrops began to fall, pattering against the roof and windows. The old man didn't move, his hand still resting on the rifle as rain washed over Pine Hollow, cleansing, renewing, like it had done for 10 summers since the fires. On the hill overlooking the town stood an ancient oak tree. Its massive trunk bore the scars of lightning strikes and human cruelty alike, but its branches spread wide and green. At its base, nearly hidden among wildflowers, a simple bronze plaque had been set into stone. Here the night riders ended, and the dawn began. Rain fell gently on the marker, on the flowers left by those who remembered, on the ground that had soaked up too much blood. The wind rustled through the grass, carrying whispers of a story that wasn't myth but warning. The legend of Caleb Turner, the ghost of Pine Hollow, who had vanished into the mist but somehow remained, watching over the peace he had paid for, with fire and blood. I hope you found that story powerful. Leave a like on the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. I have handpicked 2 stories for you that are even more powerful. Have a great day.